Chapter 7 of The Wonderful Adventures of Phra The Phoenician by Edwin Lester Arnold. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. In the days that followed, it seemed the cruse of contentment would never run dry, and I, foolish I, thought angry destiny had misled me, and that these green Saxon glades were to witness the final ending of my story. Vain hope! Elusive expectation! The hand of fate was even then raised to strike. In that pleasant harbourage, outside the ken of ambition and beyond the limits of avarice, surrounded by almost impenetrable mazes of forest land, life was delightful indeed. The sun shone yellow and big in those early days upon our oak-crowned hillocks. Sometimes I doubt if it is ever so warm and ruddy now, and December storms told mightily in praise of the great Yule fires wherewith we defied the winter cold. In the summer time, when the sunny Saxon orchards sheltered the herds of kine in their flickering shadows, and the great droves of black swine lay a-basking among the ferns on the distant hangers, we lived more out of doors than in. Editha then would bring out under the oaks the little ruddy-cheeked Gurth, and set him upon my knee, that I might cut him reed whistles or bows and arrows, while the flaxen-haired Agatha played about her mother, tuning her pretty prattle to the merry clatter of the distaff and the wheel. In the winter, the blaze that went leaping and crackling from our hearthstone shone golden upon the hair of those little ones as they sat wide-eyed by me and saw among the ruddy embers the white horse of Hengist and the banner of his brother winning those fertile vales for a noble Saxon realm. Never was there a better Saxon than I, and when I told of Harold and softened to those tender ears the story of his dying, the bright drops of sympathy stood in my small maiden's eyes, while Gurths flashed hatred of the false Norman and scorn of the foreign tyrants. Under such circumstances it will readily be understood that I ought to have had little wish to draw weapons again or bestride the good charger growing so gross and sleek in his stall all this long peace time. And yet the silken meshes of felicity were irksome against all reason, and I would grow weary of so much good fortune, finding my pretty deckings and raiment heavier, more burdensome wear than ever was martial harness. My fair Saxon wife noted these moods, and strove to mend them. She would take me out to the hawking, were I never so gloomy, and then I would envy the wild haggards of the rocks who got their living from day to day in the free mid-air, and asked no favour of either gods or men. Or, perhaps, she would make revelries upon the level green before her homestead, and thither would come all the fools and pedlars, all the bear-baiters, somersaulters and wrestlers of the shire. But I was not to be pleasured so, and I slew the bear in single combat, and tossed vindictive the somersaulters over the hucksters' stalls, and broke the ribs in the wrestlers' sides, till none would play with me, and all the people murmured. Then of a night Editha got the best gleeman in Mercia to sing to me, and when they sang of peace, and sheep, and orchards, or each praised his lemon's moon-like eyes and slender middles, I would not listen. Nor was it better when they tuned their strings to martial ditties, for that doubled my malady, since then their rhyming stirred my soul to new unrest, making worse that which they sought to cure. I sometimes think it was all this to do which brought Voewood under Norman notice. But, perhaps, it was the slow and steady advance of the invader's power, percolating like a rising tide into all the recesses of the land, which drew us into the fatal circle of the despoilers, and not my waywardness. Be this as it may, the result was the same. Over to the northward, a score of miles away, where the great road ran east, we heard from wandering strollers the Normans were passing daily. Then, later, there came in the news budget of a Flemish pedlar tidings that the hungry foreigners had licked up all the fat meadows around the nearest town, had hung its aldermen over the walls, and built a tower and dungeon, after their wont, in the middle of it. Yes, and these messengers of ill omen said there were left no men of note or Saxon blood to uphold the English cause. There was no proper speech in England but the Norman, There was no way of wearing a tunic but the Norman, nothing now to swear by but Our Lady of Tours and Holy St. Bridget. All Saxon wives were in danger of kissing, and all Saxon abbots were become barefooted monks. Never was a country turned inside out so soon or quietly, and as I looked over our wide fair meadows and upon my sweet girl and her flaxen little ones, and thought how, already for her, I had risked my life, I could not help wondering how soon I might have to venture it again. On apace came the outer conquest into our inner peace. Towns and boroughs went down, and the hungry flames of lust and avarice fed upon what they destroyed. All the vales and hills the swords of Hengist and Horsa had won and baptized with foeman's blood in the mighty names of old Norsemen and Valhalla were being christened anew to suit a mincing latter tongue. Thane and Franklin uncapped them at the roadside to these steel-bound swarms of ruthless spoilers, and nothing was sacred, neither deed nor covenant, neither having nor holding, which ran counter to the wishes of the western scourges of our English weakness. When I thought of all this I was extraordinarily ill at ease, and, before I could settle upon how best to meet the danger, it came upon us, and we were overwhelmed. Briefly, it was thus. About 12 years after the battle where Harold had died, the Norman leader had, we heard, taken it into his head to poll us like cattle, to find the sum and total of our feus and lands, our serfs and orchards, and even of our very selves. Now, few of us Saxons but felt this was a certain scheme to tax and oppress us even more severely than the people had been oppressed in the time of St. Dunstan. Besides this, our free spirits rose in scorn of being counted and weighed and mulcted by plebeian emissaries of the usurper. So we murmured loud and long, and those thanes who complained the bitterest were hanged by the derisive Normans on their own kitchen beams, on the very same hooks where they cured their mighty sides of pork, while those who complied but falsely with the assessor's commands were robbed of wife and heritage, children and lands, and shackled with the brass collar of serfdom, or turned out to beg their living on the wayside and sue the charity of their own dependents. Whether we would thus be hanged or outcast, or whether we would humble us to this hateful need, writing ourselves and our serfs down in the great Doomsday Book, all had to choose. For my part, after much debating, and for the sake of those who looked to me, I had determined to do what was required, and then, if it might be, to bring all the Saxon gentlemen together, to raise these English shires upon the Normans, and with fire and sword revoke our abominable indenture of thraldom. But alas, my hasty temper and my inability to stomach an affront in any guise undid my good resolutions. Well, this mighty book was being compiled far and wide, we heard, in every shire. There were some men of good standing base enough to countenance it, and, taking the name of the King's justiciaries, they got together shorn monks, shaveling rascals who did the writing and computing, with reeves hungry for their masters' woodlands, and many other lean forsworn villains. This jury of miscreants went round from hall to hall, from manor to manor, with their scrips and pens and parchment, until all the land was being gathered into the avaricious Norman's tax roll. They cast their greedy eyes at last on sunny, sleepy Voewood, though, indeed, I had implored every deity, old or new, I could recall that they might overlook it. And one day their hireling train of 20 pikemen came ambling down the glades with a fat abbot, a Norman rascal, at their head, and pulled up at our doorway. "Hullo there," says the monk. "Whose house is this?" "Mine," I said gruffly, with a secret fancy that there would be some heads broken before the census was completed. "And who are you?" "The master of Voewood." "What else?" "Nothing else." "Well, you are not over civil anyhow, my Saxon churl," said the man of scrolls and goose quills. "Frankly," I answered, "Sir Monk, the smaller civility you look for from me to-day, the less likely you are to be disappointed. Out with that infernal catechism of yours, and have done, and move your black shadows from my porch." At this the clerk shrugged his shoulders. No doubt he did not look to be a very welcome guest, and coughed and spit, and then unfurled in our free sunshine a great roll of questions, and forthwith proceeded to expound them in bastard Latin, smacking of mouldy cathedral cells and cloister pedantry. Now mark me, Sir Vorwood, and afterwards answer truly in everything. Here first I will read you the declaration of your neighbour, the worthy Thane Suin, in order that you may see how the matter should go, and then afterwards I will question you yourself. And taking a parchment from a junior, he began. Here is what Suin told us. Rex tenet in dominio Sohurst, de firma regis Eduardi fuit, tunc se defendebat pro septemdesin hidis, nihil geldaverunt, terra est sedessim carucatai, in dominio sunt duae carucatai, et viginti et quatuor villani, et decem bodarige, conviginti carucis, ibi ecclesia quam velemus, tenet de rege cum dimidia hida in Elemosina, silva quadragenta porcorum, et ipsa est in parco regis. But hardly had my friend got so far as this in displaying the domesticity of Suin the Thane, when there broke a loud uproar from the rear of Vorwood, and the tripping Latin came to a sudden halt as there emerged in sight a rabble of Saxon peasants and Norman prickers, freely exchanging buffets. In the midst of them was our bailiff, a very stalwart fellow, hauling along and beating as he came a luckless soldier in the foreign garb just then so detestable to our eyes. "Why," I said, "what may all this be about? What has the fellow done, Sven, that your Saxon cudgel makes such friends with his Norman cape?" "What? Why, the graceless yonker, not content with bursting open the buttery door and setting all those scullion men at arms, drinking my lady's ale and rioting among her stores, must needs harry the maidens, scaring them out of their wits and putting the whole place in an uproar. As I am an honest man, there has been more good ale spilt this half hour, more pottery broken, more linen torn, more roasts upset, more maids set screaming, than since the Danes last came round this way and pillaged us from roof to cellar." "Why, you fat Saxon porker," cried the leader of the troops, pushing to the front, "what are you good for but for pillage, drunken serf? An it were not for the politic heart of yonder king, I and mine would make you and yours sigh again for your Danish ravishers, looking back from our mastery to their red fury with sickly longing. Out on you! Unhand the youth, or by St. Bridget, there will be a fat carcass for your crows to peck at." And he put his hand upon his dagger. Thereon I stepped between them, and touching my jewelled belt said, "Fair sir, I think the youth has had no less than his deserts, and as for the Vorwood crows, they like Norman carrion even better than Saxon flesh." The soldier frowned as well as he might at my retort, but before we could draw, as assuredly we would have done, the monk pushed in between us, and the athelings of the Commission, who had orders to carry out their work with peace and dispatch as long as that were possible, quieted their unruly rabble, and presently a muttering, surly order was restored between the glowering crowds. "Now," said the scribe propitiatingly, anxious to get through with his task, "you have heard how amiably Suin answered. Of you I will ask a question or two in Saxon, since, likely enough, you do not know the blessed Latin. By the soul of Hengist, though I knew it before the stones of that confessor's ancient monastery were hewn from their native rock. Answer truly, and all shall be well with you. First, then, how much land hast thou?" But I could not stand it. My spleen was roused against these braggart bullies, and throwing discretion to the wind, I burst out, "Just so much as serves to keep me and mine in summer and winter." "And how many ploughs?" "So many as need to till our cornlands." "Rude boar," said the monk, backing off into the group of his friends, and frowning from that vantage in his turn. "How many serfs acknowledge your surly leadership?" "Just so many," I said, boiling over, "as can work the ploughs and reap the corn, and keep the land from greedy foreign clutches. There, put up your scroll and be gone. I will not answer you. I will not say how many pigeons there are in our dovecots, how many fowls roost upon their perches, how many earthen pots we have, or how many maids to scrub them. Get you back to the Conqueror, tell him I deride and laugh at him for the second time. Say I have lived a longish life, and I never yet saw the light of that day when I profited by humility. Say I, the swart stranger who stabbed his ruffian courtier and galloped away with the white maid, Editha of Voewood, I, who plucked that flower from the very saddle-bow of his favourite, and thundered derisive through his first camp there on the eastern downs, say, even I will find a way to keep and wear her, in scorn of all that he can do. Out with you, begone! And they went, for I was clearly in no mood to be dallied with, while behind me the serfs and vassals were now mustering strongly, an angry array, armed with such weapons as they could snatch up in their haste, and wanting but a word or look to fall upon the little band of assessors and slay them as they stood. Thus we won that hour, and many a long day had we to regret the victory. My luck was against me that time. I hoped, so far as there was any hope or reason in my thoughtless anger, to have had a space to rouse the neighbouring thanes and their vassals upon these our tyrants, and I had dreamt, so combustible was the country just then, somehow perhaps the flame would have spread far and wide. I saw that abominable thing, rebellion, for once linked hand in hand with her sweet rival, patriotism. I saw the red flames of vengeance in the quarrel I had made my own, sweeping through the land and lapping up with its 100 tongues every evidence of the spoilers. Yes, and even I had fancied that, and there were no true Saxon princes for our English throne, there was still Editha my wife. And if there were no swords left to fence a throne so filled, yet there was the sword of Phra the Phoenician. Vain fantasy! The faces of the Fates were averted. Those hateful inquisitors had not gone many hours' journey northward when, as ill luck would have it, they fell in with a Norman captain, Godfrey de Beauville, and 200 men at arms, marching to garrison a western city. To these they told their tale, and, ever ready for pillage and bloodshed, the band halted and then turned into the woodlands where we had our lair. The sun was low that afternoon when an affrighted herdsman came running into me with the news that he knew not how many soldiers were in the glades beyond. And before he could get his breath or quite tell his hasty message, their prickers came out of the wood, the gallant Norman array, whose glitter has since grown dearer to me than the shine of a mistress's eyes, rode from under our oak trees. The banners and bannerets fluttered upon the evening wind, their trumpets brayed until our very rafters echoed to that warlike sound. The level twilight rays flashed back from those serried ranks, and the steel panoply of the warriors, in as goodly a martial show as ever, to that day, I had seen. What need I tell you of the negotiations which followed while this silver cloud, charged with ruin and cruelty, hung on the dusky velvet side of the twilight hill above us? What need be said of how I swore between my teeth at the chance which had brought this swarm hither in a day rather than in the week I had hoped for, or how my heart burned with smothered anger and pride when we had to tamely answer their haughty summons to unconditional surrender? Yet by one saving clause they did not attack us at once. Only to me was it clear how utterly impossible was it with the few rugged serfs at my command to defend even for one single onset that great straggling house against their overwhelming force. To them our strength was quite unknown. This and the gathering darkness tempted the Norman to put off the attack until the daylight came again, and the respite was our saving. It was not a saving upon which I wished to dwell long, for 'twas no more glorious than the retreat of a wolf from his hiding place when the shepherds fire the brake behind him. All along the edge of the hill their watchfires presently twinkled out, and as Editha and Sven the Strong came to me in gloomy conference upon the turret, we could see the soldiers pass now and again before the blaze. We could hear their laughter and the snatches of their drinking song, the hoarse cry of the wardens, and the champing and whinny of the chargers picketed under the starlight in lines upon our free Saxon turf. And for Sven and all his good comrade hinds, we knew tomorrow would bring the riveting of new and heavier collars than any they had worn as yet. For me and my contumacy, though I feared it not, there could be naught but the swift absolution of a Norman sword, while for her, that gentle, stately lady, to whose pale sweetness my rough, unworthy pen can do no sort of justice, there was nameless degradation and half a wandering bully's tent. The serf suggested, with his rugged northern valour, we should set light to the hall, and with the women and children in our midst, sally out and cut away to freedom, and I knew the path he would choose would have been through the hostile camp. But his lady suggested better. She proposed both hind and bondsman should steal away in the darkness, and, since valour here was hopeless, disperse over the countryside, and there, secure in their humbleness, await our future returning. We, on the other hand, would follow them through the friendly shadows that lay deep and nigh to the house on the unguarded side, and then turn us to a monastery some few miles away, where, if we could reach it, in sanctuary and the care of one of the few remaining Saxon abbots, we might bide our chance, or at least make terms with our conquerors. So it was settled, and soon I had all those kind, shaggy villains in the dining hall, standing there uncapped upon the rushes in the torchlight, and listening in melancholy silence to the plan, and then presently, with the dispatch our situation needed, they were slipping in twos and threes out of the little rearward portal and slinking off to the thickets. Presently our turn came, and as I stood gloomy and stern in that voiceless empty hall that was wont to be so bright and noisy, fingering my itching dagger and scowling out of the lattice upon the red gleam in the night air hanging over the Norman campfires, there came the fall of my wife's feet upon the stairway. In either hand she had a babe, swaddled close up against the night air, and naught but their bright wonder-brimming eyes showing as she hugged them tight against her sides. For them alone, the frown gave way, and I stooped to that escape. We crept away, and Editha's heart was torn at leaving thus the hall where she had been born and reared, and when, presently in the shadows of the crowded oaks, she found all her slaves and bondsmen in a knot to wish her farewell, the tears that had been brooding long overflowed unrestrainedly. Even I, who had dwelt among them but a space on my way from the further world of history towards the unknown future, could not but be moved by their uncouth love and loyalty. There were men there who had stood in arms with her father when the cruel Danes had ravished these valleys for a score of miles inland, and some who had grown with her in the goodly love and faith of thane and servitor as long as she herself had lived. These rugged fellows wept like children, called me father, Clafford, bread bestower, and pressed upon her in silent sorrow, kissing her hands and the hem of her robe, and taking the little ones from her arms, and pressing their rude unshaven faces to their rosebud cheeks, until I feared that Gurth or Agatha might cry out, or some wail from that secret scene of sorrow would catch the ears of our watchful foemen. So, as gently as might be, I parted the weeping mistress and her bondsman, and set her upon a good horse Sven had stolen from the paddock, and springing into the saddle of my own strong charger, gave my broad jewelled belt to the Saxon that he might divide it among his comrades, and taking a long tough spear from his faithful hand, turned northward with Editha upon our dangerous journey. We stole along as quietly as might be for some distance in safety, riding where the moss was deepest and the shadows thick, and then, just when we were at the nearest to the Norman camp in the curve we were making towards the monastery beyond, those ill-conditioned invaders set up their evening trumpet call. As the shrill notes came down into the dim starlight glade, strong, clear and martial in the evening quiet, they thrilled that gallant old charger I had borrowed from the camp at Hastings down to his inmost warlike fibre. He recognised the familiar sound. Mayhap it was the very trumpet call which had been fodder and stable to him for years, and, with ears pricked forward and feet that beat the dewy turf in union to his pleasure, he whinnied loud and long. Nothing it availed me to smite my hand upon my breast at this deadly betrayal, or lay a warning finger upon his brave, unwitting velvet nozzle. Luckless, accursed horse, the mischief was done. But yet I will not abuse him, for the grass grows green over his strong sleek limbs, and right well that night he amended his error. Hardly had his neigh gone into the stillness when the chargers in the camp answered it, and in a moment the men at arms and squires by the nearest fire were all on foot, and in another they had espied us and set up a shout that woke the ready camp in a moment. There was small time to think. I clapped my hand upon Editha's bridle rein and gave my own a shake, and away we went across the checkered moonlight glade. But so close had we been that a bowstring or two hummed in the Norman tents, and before we were fairly started I heard the rustle of the shafts in the leaves overhead. It was more than arrows we had to dread, and turning my head for a moment ere we plunged again into the dark vistas of the forest road, there, sure enough, was the pursuit streaming out after us, and gallant squires and knights tumbling into their saddles and shouting and cheering as they came galloping and glittering down behind us. A very pretty show, but a dangerous one. By the souls of St. Dunstan and his 40 monks, but I could have enjoyed that midnight ride had it not been for the pale brave rider at my side, and the little ones that lay fearfully a-nestling on our saddle bows. For hours the swift, keen gallop of our horses swallowed the unseen ground in tireless rhythm. All through the night, field and coppice and hanger swept by us as we passed from glade to glade and woodland to woodland. Now 'twas a lonely forester's hut that shone for a moment in ghostly whiteness between the tree stems, with the nightshine on its lifeless face, and anon we sped through droves of Saxon swine, sleeping upon the roadway under their oak trees round a muffled swineherd, and the great forest stags stayed the fraying of their antlers against the tree trunks in the dark coppices as we flew by, and the startled wolf yelped and snarled upon our path as our fleeting shadows o'ertook him. And then, there, ever behind, low, remorseless, stern, came the murmuring hoof-beats of our pursuers, now rising and now falling upon the light breath of the night wind, but ever, as our panting steeds strode shorter and shorter, coming nearer and nearer, clearer and clearer. Had this sombre race, whereof death held the stakes, continued so as it began, straight on end, I do not think we could have got away. But when we had ridden many an hour, and the heavy streaks of white foam were marking Editha's horse with dreadful suggestion, and his breath was coming hot and husky through his wide red nostrils, for a moment or two the sound of the pursuers stopped. Blessed respite! They had missed the woodland road, but for all too short a space. We had hardly made good 400 or 500 yards of advantage when, terribly near to us, sounded the call of one of their horsemen, and soon all the others were in his footsteps again. This one, he who now led the pursuers by, perhaps, a quarter of a mile, gained on us stride by stride until I could stand the thud of his horse hoofs on the turf behind no more. ' Here !' I said fiercely to Editha, ' take girth,' and put him with his sister in her arms, then, bidding them ride slowly forward, turned my good charger and paced him slowly back towards the oncoming night, with stern anger smouldering in my heart. There was a smooth, wide bit of grassy road between us in that centre, midnight Saxon forest, and never a gleam of light fell upon that ancient thoroughfare, never the faintest thin white finger of a star pierced the black canopy of boughs overhead. It was as black as the kennel of Cerberus, and as I sat my panting war horse I could not see my own hand stretched out before me, yet there in that grim blackness I met the Norman lance to lance, and sent his spirit whirling into the outer space. I let him come within 200 yards, then suddenly rose in my stirrups and, shouting Harold's war cry, since I did not deign to fall upon him unawares, ' Out ! Out ! England ! England !' awaited his answer. It came in a moment, strange and inhuman in the black stillness. ' Ro ! Haro ! Notre Dame !' And then, muttering between my tight-set teeth that surely that road was the road to hell for one of us, I bent my head down almost to my horse's ears, drove the spurs into him, and, gripping my long keen spear, thundered back upon my unseen foeman. With a shock that startled the browsing hinds a mile away, we were together. The Norman's spear broke into splinters athwart my body, but mine, more truly held, struck him fair and full. I felt him like a great dead weight upon it. I felt his saddle girths burst and fly, and then, as my own strong haft bent like a willow wand and snapped close by my hand, that midnight rider and his visionary steed went crashing to the ground. Bitterly I laughed as I turned my horse northwards once more, and from a black cavern mouth on the hillside an owl echoed my grim merriment with ghastly glee. Well, the night was all but done, yet we were not out of the toils. A little further on, Editha's floundering steed gave out, and, just as we saw the pale turrets of the monastery shining in the open a mile ahead of us, the horse rolled over dead upon the grass and bracken. ' Quick, quick !' I said, ' daughter of Hardicanute !' And the good Saxon girl had passed the little ones to the pummel and put her own foot upon my toe and sprang onto my saddle crupper sooner than it takes to tell. Ah, and the nearer we came to our goal, the closer seemed to be the throb and beat of the pursuing hoofs behind, and many an anxious time did I turn my head to watch the rogues closing with us, now ever and anon in sight, and many a word of encouragement did I whisper to the gallant charger whose tireless courage was standing us in such good case. Noble beast! Right well had he atoned his mistake that evening, and in a few minutes more we left the greenwood, and now he swept us over the Abbot's fat meadows, where the white morning mist was lying ghostly in wreaths and wisps upon the tall wet grass. And then we staggered into the fosse and spurned the short turf, and so past the checkered cloisters, and pulled up finally at a low postern door I had espied as we approached the nearest wall of the noble Saxon monastery. Surely never was a traveller in such a hurry to be admitted as I, and I beat upon that iron-studded door with the knob of my dagger in a way which must have been heard in every cell of that sacred pile. ' My friend,' said a reverend head which soon appeared at a little window above, ' is this not unseemly haste at such an hour, and my Lord Abbot not yet risen to matins ?'' For the love of Heaven, Father,' I said, ' come down and let us in,' for by this time the Normans were not a bowshot away, and it still looked as if we might fall into their hands. ' Why,' said the unwotting monk, ' no doubt the hospitality of St. Olaf's walls was never yet refused to weary strangers, but you must go round to the lodge and rouse the porter there. Truly he sleeps a little heavy, but no doubt he will admit you eventually.' ' Sir Priest,' I shouted in my rage and fear as the good old fellow went meandering on, ' our need is past all nicety of etiquette. Here is Editha of Voewood, the niece of your holy Abbot himself, and yonder are they who would harry and take her. Come down, or by the holy rood our blood will for ever stain your ungenerous lintel.' By this time the horsemen were breasting the smooth green glacis that led up to the monastery walls. Half a dozen of them had outlived that wild race. The reins were upon their smoking chargers' necks, their reeking spurs red and ruddy with their haste, the spattered clay and loam of many a woodland rivulet checkering their horses to the shoulders, and each rider as he came shouting and clapping his hands upon the foam-speckled neck of these panting steeds that strained with thundering feet to the last 100 yards of green sward and the prize beyond. Nearer and nearer they came, and my fair, tall Saxon wife put down her little ones by the opening of the door and covered them with her skirt as she turned her pale white tearless face to the primrose flush of the morning, and I, with bitterness and despair in my heart, unsheathed my Saxon sword and cast the scabbard fiercely to the ground, and stood out before them, my bare and heaving breast a fair target for those glistening oncoming Norman lances. And then, just when that game was all but lost, there came the sweet patter of sandalled feet within, bolt by bolt was drawn back, willing hands were stretched out, the mother and her babes were dragged from the steps, even my charger was swallowed by the friendly shelter, and I myself was pulled back lastly. The postern slammed to, and as the great locks turned again and the iron bars fell into their stony sockets, we heard the Norman chargers' hoofs ringing on the flagstones, and the angry spearheads rattling on the outer studs of that friendly oaken doorway. Thus was the gentle Franklin saved, but little did I think in saving her how long I was to lose her. I had but stabled my noble beast down by the Abbot's own palfrey, and fed and watered him with loving gratitude, and then had gone to Editha and my own supper, waited on by many a wondering, kindly one of those corded russet brothers, when that strange fate of mine overtook me once again. I know not how it was, but all on a sudden the world melted away into a shadowy fantasy. My head sank upon the supper board, and there, between the goodly Abbot and the fair Saxon lady, I fell into a pleasant, dreamless sleep. End of chapter 7.